Welcome back to Morning After Pictures, or Morning After Reviews, or Day After Reviews, or Week After Reviews, or We're Really Late Reviews. So just reviews after the moment in which something has come out. It's not midnight reviews, it's not reactions, it's more of a concise, thought-out opinion about a movie that has recently come out that I saw and that I thought about. So I just call it Morning After. So today we're going to continue the March movie madness of we're going to release all the movies in the world in March. I didn't even talk about Beauty and the Beast, but we have tons of movies that are coming out all the time this month. So today we're talking about the 2017 version of Power Rangers, the motion picture. Okay, it's not Power Rangers, the movie. It's just Power Rangers. No Mighty Morphin, no Turbo, none of that. So, this is an alternate take on the classic Super Sentai adaptation of Power Rangers that came out in the 90s. That is the show that everybody remembers. Half of it was English made, half of it was Japanese made. And they made movies based on that, and that show continues on. While this movie is a better than average film, it is lacking compared to modern expectations. Considering we have movies like Marvel movies and even the DC movies to some extent, and just modern action films like the Mission Impossible or the Fast and the Furious movies, it does not live up to those expectations as an action film. But one thing that this movie does do is it portrays the teenage characters in a realistic and subtle way. It is well done, and they are good characters. They might not all have the same level of depth. They might not all have the same stories, but they all have something that's interesting about them, and that's done really well. The guy who created this film, actually, or I should say the director, he worked on Project Almanac, which was kind of a chronicle-type movie involving time travel. And so he's probably got a lot of experience with teenagers. And so one thing this movie does not do, and does not portray well, in my opinion at least, is the villain, Rita. She's played by Elizabeth Banks, and she must have tried to poorly imitate the character from the original show, or they just told her to be campy for the sake of being campy, which is totally fine. This movie could actually be more campy, and it might have been a little bit better. But what she does is her own take on Rita that is not so much a good villain, and not so much a good imitation of the actual Rita character from the old show. So, she's a bit out there. She's not total. She doesn't ruin the movie by any means. She's good enough. And the backstory they set up for her is actually pretty interesting. And that kind of brings us to Bryan Cranston, who plays Zordon in the film. So he's the mentor. He's kind of the older leader. He's your Obi-Wan. And he does a fairly good job, and they gave him a concise and important purpose for the team, which is really cool. So, I definitely appreciate that. And he did his best considering what little material he had, because he's really not in that much of the movie. The most disappointing aspect of the movie is just the third act. There's nothing around that. There's no way to beat around the bush. The actual action of this film is not that good. The character development is much more interesting. And I don't personally believe they had the budget to do an elaborate film that they wanted to do. There was definitely a lot of cutbacks when it came to the third chapter of this, the third arc, I should say, of this film. The action just wasn't, I don't believe it was filmed well, lots of blurry CGI, lots of daylight destruction that just didn't look very real, and particularly the final battle is very lackluster. We could have definitely used more Power Ranger action, which is kind of sad. But, it's serious, but still a little jokey. I kind of wish they would have just committed to the campiness of it all and tried to do it in a serious way. I don't know. There just seems to be a better way they could have handled this. But it is a responsible film in that it does have a modest budget. It's not a $300 million Transformers movie. So you got to give them a little bit credit for that. But the CGI, particularly with the Zords, is definitely not the best. And I think that the action and the action and the conflict of the movie, in many ways, are the main detriment. The characters are not so much problem outside of Rita. The rest of the characters seem to work pretty well, and the Rangers themselves are really interesting, and maybe in a sequel they'll be better handled. But I would have to give this movie a 6 out of 10. It's a shame that 2/3 of this movie really holds itself together, only to collapse at the finish line and to end abruptly and end rather calmly, all things considered. So 6 out of 10. That's my lowest movie yet, but that does not mean it's terrible. It's definitely an okay movie, and I think it's better than most people would think it is. And I think it's a little bit better than I thought it was going to be. And I also have the bias of being an old Power Ranger fan. But 6 out of 7 is nothing to be ashamed of. It just gives you lots of room to work on. So I'll see you guys next time on Morning After Reviews.